everyone, dear viewers and listeners and watchers of my humble channel at Soul Chaser Becky. Welcome to episode 8 of Valhalla Conversations and the rather long title of Every Man Wants to be a King but Leif, which is how I'm summarising the entire Valhalla Season 3, which is in some ways sad that it's the final season because they've left a lot of things untied at the end after tangling them all up marvellous well. And I'm delighted to say that, almost like reuniting a coven of witches, I have my 3 favourite guests to discuss this series. Patricia Bracewell from America, Sharon, Bennett, Connolly, and of course Justin Hill. They're all authors of wonderful books. I have Patricia's there. I have Justin's there. I haven't yet got yours, Sharon. Apologies. It is on my Christmas list. And I would have had Justin Hill's also wonderful Harold Harada book, Viking Fight, on my shelf, but it's on the top shelf where all the big spiders are living. So it's just, he's staying there to guard me from the spiders. So apologies, Justin. But there's another title of Harold Harada. And of course, Canute, because I've got lots of non-fiction books on Canute, because he is indeed a wonderful character to learn about. Especially if you've been watching the Vikings Valhalla series, which hopefully you will have done, because we are going to be talking about Season 3, the final season, and there will be spoilers. Spoilers, everyone? Have you heard? Spoilers? But it's right, good. You either carry on or you go away and watch it and then come back. Okay? Right, we'll see you either along or later. Okay, so I've given you all the title of this episode, and we will be lenient with Justin. We've given him a summary of events to date, kind of thing. Giving him snapshots of what's been happening, because Justin's the black sheep in that he hasn't been following it as we have, but he knows what really happened compared to what the series shows, which is why Justin is a very wise fellow of our group. So, ladies, what do you think of my title summary of Season 3, that every man wants to be a king, or indeed woman, with Freydis being a leader of sorts, but Leif being the odd one out? Do you think that's rather accurate, or would you sum it in a different way?
No, I think that's fairly accurate. I think, although man is probably not, because even Arthur Canute, who appears as a 6-year-old, has decided he's going to be king anyway.
I think that's right, and it's set up in the very first episode when the Pope asks Canute who his heir is going to be, and Canute doesn't have an answer, and we don't hear the answer until episode 7. But they're jockeying all the way through.
Yeah. Although the annoying thing is that Swain Forkbeard wants to be Canute's heir, and yet Swain Forkbeard has been dead for 20 years.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about the timeline, which, as far as I'm concerned, they took the timeline, scrunched it up into a ball and threw it away.
Yeah.
It's very much Doctor Who time, where everything is possible. It's not a completely alternative timeline to what actually happened.
I get the impression with Swain that they forgot to kill him off in the first season, and so they decided they might as well keep him alive.
Yeah, I was going to say, why do you think they've changed the timeline so profoundly?
I don't know why they did. There was no reason to. That's what gets me. Although there was in a way, because there are certain people who are like William the Conqueror, although he's only Duke William at this point. He's 7 at the time that Canute dies in 1035. And yet he's, about 14 or 15 in the series?
Yeah, definite teenager.
So they've made him a bit older in order to have him in the programme. But
they did the same with Harold. They did the same with Harold Hardrada. I mean, he was much younger. So basically what they're trying to do, I think, is have this contention for the English throne, the Danish throne, the Norse throne. And they're bringing all the players over 50 years together at one time.
Yeah.
I believe when it was first announced, their whole gig was that we're going to take everyone all the way to 1066 and have it end at that point. And they didn't quite get there for various reasons, because of time and characters being in different locations. I mean, we've got no idea. I mean, I don't think Leif went all the way to the east to then go all the way west, but...
No, and if he did, I mean, wasn't it something like 1002 that he was supposed to have discovered America? In which case, what's he still doing around in 1035 when Canute dies?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpick. But starting off with episode 1. Sorry,
but
carry
it
on.
makes the Tudors look historically accurate.
But thinking of episode 1, where Canute and Emma are meeting the Pope in Rome, in the Vatican, he did genuinely go and meet the Pope. We would like to clarify that for all viewers watching and listening, that he did really meet the Pope. He was an English king of Norse descent, and he did meet the Pope, which is quite a milestone. Not many kings back then could say that. I mean, Alfred the Great did meet the Pope, but he was very, very young. Very young. He never went back after he got older and became king, I don't think. So I still think that was a nice touch.
It was something that happened in the 11th century. Macbeth also went to Rome.
Yes.
To meet the Pope. So it was something that they all did in that time. What I found interesting, or rather annoying, was that they had him meet the Pope. But what he did whilst he was in Rome was arrange the marriage of his daughter to the Holy Roman Emperor. And yet they didn't include that bit at all.
No.
He was there for the coronation of the emperor, and really his negotiations were with the emperor and also with the Pope, realistically. And so, yes, they talk about how the Pope was going to give him some land. Well, it really wasn't the Pope. It was the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II, who gave him land in Denmark in return for his help with the Poles who were attacking Germany at the time. So it was very complicated. And they just boiled it down to, let's have him talk to the Pope. And I don't know, Sharon, what really bothered me was the gift that they gave the Pope.
Oh, yes.
The head in a box.
A head in a box. And apparently they're giving Emma the credit for suggesting that. They make a very, very creepy Emma.
Yeah. And the head in the box was the Pope's
series.
Liaison. He was the Pope's bishop. The Pope would not have appreciated his bishop's head being cut off, even if he didn't like the bloke. You know, there's that attack against the church thing that they really don't like. And yet,
I think they were trying to do an interesting setup between Emma's more extreme motives of manipulation versus Godwin, who basically kept dropping him bags of gold in his hand, saying, "Oh, please, please let Canute come and see the Pope again. He didn't mean to throw a hissy fit. He's just a Norse king. He's just a Norse king, just blaming it all on his heritage." When some people might have felt quite entitled as a king, because of course he wasn't a Christian from birth. He did have, well, in the series it depicts him having alternative faith before becoming the King of England. So he probably did not, suitable to the character at least in this series, have respect for the Pope as Godwin and Emma did, coming from a raised up Christian background kind of thing.
So Godwin accompanies him to Rome, does he?
Yes.
Okay.
Godwin translates for them in Latin at points, although Godwin didn't know about the head in the casket until it was opened.
Yeah, because of course the very interesting thing is that you know, when Canute goes to Rome, he leaves Godwin in charge as regent, which kind of shows two things: one, the trust which he parts with Godwin, but also how secure he feels in England to leave it behind and go on pilgrimage.
What he did not do was take both Emma and Godwin. I mean, that would have, you'd have to leave one of them at least behind. And there is the question of, you know, they're throwing out the idea that Emma went with him to Rome. Could she have gone to Rome? Nothing in history indicates that she did. On the other hand, nothing in history really covers what the women were doing. So
we've talked about
yes, I was okay with her being in Rome with him, but not with both of them. Somebody had to be holding the fort back in England.
Yeah, what do you think? My hunch would be that Emma did go to Rome.
Mine would be as well.
She's going to in my book.
I can't see Emma letting Canute go without her.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was the same with Macbeth. His wife, Lady Macbeth, grew up, went with him.
Did she?
I mean, this is such visiting Rome and visiting the Pope and the Emperor. It's such a big thing.
What's a lifetime?
You would take your wife.
And going as a married king would no doubt kind of give you some added respect in Rome as well, by doing it through the Christian rites, which Canute and Emma, as far as we know, did do.
Well, that was the other thing, wasn't it? Emma was seen as Canute's link to England and as a strength to Canute. So he's going to show her off, especially if you're going to arrange the marriage of your daughter by Emma with the emperor while you're there.
Yeah.
You want to show the emperor the lineage that your daughter comes from on both sides, and especially, you know, Emma of Normandy and the links with the Normans as well as the English. And, you know, she was such an influential character in her own right.
Yeah.
You're going to show her off.
And of course, the Normans had, you know, very strong links with the papacy, you know, going forward, and links to the Mediterranean as well. So, yeah, I can't imagine her staying behind.
Well,
I thought it was quite Go ahead, Sharon.
I'm just saying, like, the links with Normandy, because Italy at that time, especially southern Italy, the Normans were down there fighting, weren't they? So they were taking over Sicily and places like that. So to have that link with Emma, you're going to need it.
Yeah.
I was also interested in the way they gowned Emma and Canute. They looked quite Russian. They looked, I mean, Canute looked like Ivan the Terrible coming in there. And Emma was gowned very, very Russian, high medieval Russian. I thought that was really quite interesting. It kind of is giving us that link of the Rus and the Vikings. You know, I thought that was pretty interesting, the way they did that.
Yeah, because of course,
Emma's outfits.
The majority of the Viking world happens in the East. You know, we focus on the West, but the kind of expanse of the Viking travelers and the Rus and Kiev and down to Baghdad and Constantinople. It's an incredible story.
That's interesting. And certainly it makes me think now, of course, because in episode 1, we don't just see Canute and Emma and Godwin all vying for the favour of the Pope, but we also get a glimpse about what Harold Hardrada, or Hardrada to be, because he's not yet given himself the nickname, and Leif Erikson are getting up to in what is Istanbul, but then Constantinople, and otherwise known as Miklagard, down under the kind of like the emperor there, with Empress Zoe. And of course, Harold is leading the Varangians. He is leading battles. They show him leading a siege of Syracuse. So I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, Justin.
Yeah, I think it is.
Interesting.
I mean, he wasn't, was he leading? There's a Byzantine general who's leading the expedition. But as far as we know, the Varangian Guard are kind of the shock elite troops. And of course, in the sagas, Harold and the Byzantine general have a tiff and arguments over all kinds of things. And I think they split away from the main body and kind of go and do some of their own campaigning. Yeah, but I was in Syracuse 3 years ago, and I was certainly poking around, imagining Harold being on the hills and following the Athenians, 1,000 years later.
Well, interestingly, Harold does have a bit of an animosity. I can't think of the right word. Well, not quite a tiff, but definitely there's some conflict emerging between a Byzantine general called Maniakes.
Yeah, that's it.
Who is cast very stereotypically as a large Herculean-sized brute of a guy with short hair, real butch-looking face, huge muscles, and he literally, in one scene, he's literally bare chest wrestling all the other generals because he's got no one else to fight. And he goes, Hardrada, come on and face me. And Hal's like, no, if I want to fight you, I will when I want to. Kind of thing.
I think that's a fairly good representation of him.
Really? Interesting.
I think so, yeah.
So I thought, are they just going for like the bully stereotype to have someone that looks physically more dominating than Harold, who's, of course, still well muscled. The guy who plays him, I've forgotten his actual name, is definitely been in the gym for the role. But yeah, there's a scene where Harold has to save the Emperor from being lopped off by the Syracusians rulers, horse riding assassin type things. And because then of course Maniaca falls out of favour because he didn't do it, Harold did. They still can't break the siege, but Harold says his Varangians have got a plan, and it turns out to be Leif, who's become somewhat of a Norse scholar / scientist, and he's worked out how to use sulfur and fire to make explosives. And they dig a secret tunnel under the wall and blow it up, and then the Varangians charge through, and the leader doesn't expect it at all in Syracuse's fort, and that's how they do it. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting way of shoehorning Leif into the action in Syracuse, even though I couldn't quite see it happening. Personally, because I don't know if that kind of science and explosive technology was around for anyone to use, at least on the Emperor of Constantinople side of things.
I think they have Greek fire at this point.
Yeah.
And
I was expecting to see Greek fire, but they didn't show us any.
Yeah, they did.
Did they?
Leif used Leif didn't use Greek fire. Maniakis stole it and used it against the inhabitants at the end of the
is that what he threw in? I thought it was just more sulfuric explosives that he was firing in.
The way they did it, the way they suggested it was that they blew sulfur, dropped sulfur on all the inhabitants and then lit it. That's Greek fire, but that's what they were supposed to be doing. That isn't Greek fire. Unfortunately, we don't actually know the ingredients of Greek fire. They've been trying to recreate it for centuries and they can't do it. So it was just this one theory that you light sulfur and that makes Greek fire. I'm pretty sure it's not as that simple, because they'd have been able to do it, they would have done that. But...
And I think it's always described as being shot out. So I always have the image in my head for the Vikings of it almost being like a dragon, a ship with kind of a spout that shoots fire. It must have just been so resonant for them.
Or some kind of cannonball equivalent set on fire and then launched from a trebuchet or something like that.
Extraordinary.
But, they did include Greek fire, but not as it would have been.
Sounds like they've made Leif a kind of latter-day Archimedes.
Yeah. The whole idea of Greek fire, I think, is that it stays a fire even in water.
Right. It doesn't burn. It doesn't go out. It's got to have some sort of oil, I think, accompaniment to it.
Some kind of napalm.
We saw that in Game of Thrones.
The nearest equivalent is napalm.
Yeah.
But we still don't know. We've lost the ingredients, and there's probably a book out there with all the ingredients of how to make things like that Leif wrote and probably took it to America with him. So it's probably under a stone in America.
It's on the dark web somewhere.
Well, I did want to say about those battle scenes and all the fight scenes, I thought were really well choreographed.
Yeah.
Good.
In the show, I thought they were done quite well. I was really impressed by it. Both the big battles and the smaller one-on-one sort of thing we see between Harold, Hardrada, and Maniacus, and so I thought that was really quite good.
Because what Maniacus does to the people in Syracuse, I mean, the Constantinople Emperor tells the leader that they can either surrender or not, and then Leif points out that he's actually sealed up 5 of their wells, so they're all going to die of dehydration before food, etc., so you might as well just give in. And then noble leader says, I will fight your champion, and if I win, we go free, and if not, then we will all submit to you. Harold Hardrada is picked over Maniacus to be the Emperor's champion. And it is quite a tough combat. He actually gets surprised by one slash across his arm, I think, before he manages to get a dagger in the side in what appeared to be a fumble and kill the leader. And then the Emperor says, I will stick to my vow, I will not harm your people are safe. And of course the Emperor goes back to Constantinople to celebrate and proclaim great victory. Maniacus discovers what Leif has been doing and decides to commandeer it, as Sharon said, and thus put all the people in Syracuse to fire, effectively. And thus Leif has his kind of Einstein, or is it Einstein? or was it someone else? No, it wasn't someone else. It wasn't Einstein.
No,
it was
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer moment.
Yeah.
He has some great regret for this discovery and it being used to do the wrong thing. And Maniakes just says, well, they were heathens. They don't believe in God. Because they're all Muslim, of course. So he just wants to wipe out all Muslims off the face of the earth, regardless of what his emperor says and does. And remarkably, he doesn't suffer any punishment for that, which I thought, well, that cannot have gone unnoticed. But Maniakes probably has more people agreeing with him, siding with him, than defending against Harold Hardrada kind of thing. They both return to Constantinople and both are given a great title that I don't even know if I've written it down correctly. There's a Stratos. There's this long title which apparently makes them second to the emperor, which was interesting. And of course they both get it. Although Maniakes does repeatedly refer to the Varangians as the emperor's bodyguards, which in historical terms they were. But it was nice that the series showed them being used in the campaign world as well as just standing around the castle, keeping an eye on the emperor and whatnot.
Yeah, I think there were two grades of Varangian Guard. When you started, I think it was the Varangians outside the walls was the full title. And that was essentially the kind of the mercenary shock troop. And then once you've proven your loyalty and ability, then you kind of graduate to the Varangian Guard in the palace. I think that's how it worked. I remember Harold gets a quite odd title. He's not second in charge to the emperor, but he does get something like he's the Greek word means something like he's allowed to have silver band on his cloak, something like this. So clearly it was a very kind of regimented or Byzantine system of honors.
In the show, they do give him a new cloak, a new
new suit of armor. It looks very Roman, very Roman. But I don't know much about Roman military armor. It just looked made me think of a Roman warrior.
But I suppose they thought that Constantinople at that time was the center of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was still the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So I think
they called themselves Romanus, didn't they?
Yeah, that was probably the link with the Roman uniforms, because I thought that they were all wearing Roman gear that you hadn't seen for 1,000 years by that point.
I love those red cloaks.
Starthakinon I think was the word, but I'm not even sure that's pronunciation right. Starthakinon Konondos. They say it so well in the show. They really practice that word. I salute them for it because I can't pronounce it. I guess the only other slight introduction that we see in episode 1 is, of course, Freydis back in the now fairly settled and peaceful pagan settlement of Jomsburg, and she oversees a marriage, and then this intriguing character of Stiger walks on, who just seems to be a wanderer. He seems to have come from further east than even Leif and Hardrada have been, because he mentions about kind of like meditation and does defensive combat, not aggressive combat, defensive. He seems to be very much like a monk, a Norse monk, but without following any faith. And I think that explores Freydis's role as a leader until, of course, things go a bit wrong there when Jomsburg gets poisoned, because they all have eaten flour with poisoned mushrooms in, which is unfortunate. So that's basically a lot of what happens in episode 1. Episode 2 is covering Syracuse and the Maniakes betraying the Emperor's vow of protecting the people. That's when Emma talks to the Pope and identifies the Cardinal on her hit list and arranges that somehow miraculously in the heavily guarded Vatican capital of Vatican City.
Yeah.
she knows people. That's it. And then we get a bit of a glimpse in Norway, because that's where, after Canute and Emma have appeased the Pope and got their blessing, and albeit have to build more churches in order to honor the Pope, Canute sends Godwin to Norway to reunite with, of course, his wife, which is Canute's niece. Not his sister, is it?
Gitta is actually Canute's sister. sister's sister-in-law.
Sister-in-law, that was it. I knew it was somewhere along the family tree. It wasn't quite close, but it was adjoined.
Yeah, her brother's married to Canute's sister.
And we get a glimpse of pagan life in Norway, where apparently Sweyn Forkbeard is also visiting with his wife, although we never see her either. We hear her mentioned. We know she's around, but we never see her. And that's where we meet Harold Harefoot in quite a stark fashion of being completely naked. Because, of course, he was happily doing things with certain ladies at the time, because it's that kind of a festival. And he just comes out to Godwin and says, Godwin, I want you to make me the next King of England. And I'm like, what? Say that again?
Put some clothes on first.
Because, of course, Harold Harefoot, not to be confused with Harold Godwin or Harold Hardrada to be, Harold Harefoot is one of, I think it's the oldest son of Elgifu, who is now ruling Norway with, Denmark with Svein. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
Harefoot's, or am I getting them confused?
Harefoot's the younger son, I think. I think
Harefoot the youngest.
No, he's the oldest.
Svein is the oldest.
Oh yes, that's it. Svein, because Svein's on the throne, albeit with his mother Elgifu at his side.
And her mother's, his mother's from the Five Boroughs, I think.
Mercia is where they depict her being from in the series.
She's actually, the theory is she's Elgifu of York, isn't she? Or no, or is that was that Ethelred? That was Ethelred's second wife, wasn't it? Northampton, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the theory is it the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle actually says that Sweyn and Harold Harefoot are the sons of a priest
and a cobbler. One a priest, one a cobbler.
Yeah.
So, yeah, somebody was telling tales.
Yeah.
Political assassination there.
Yeah, trying to discredit them.
Yes, and towards the end, I'm sort of jumping ahead here, but Emma and Afgiku have this sort of nicey moment towards the end of the series where they're friendly, and I thought, yeah, that never happened. They were never friendly.
Well, I like to think that particular scene, and we will skip ahead to it, to give a summary to Justin. This is when Canute decides to go to the fictional settlement of Kattegat and summon all his sons and Emma's sons, and Elgifu's sons are also around. So he's got all his heirs apparent to be there, including Godwin, who also wants the throne. At this point, Sweyn Forkbeard has died. He doesn't die as quickly as he should have done, but they do eventually kill him off. But Canute's, obviously, he shows a lot of symptoms throughout this final series of possibly Parkinson's. He gets a bit of a tremor, a bit of a weak hand.
Yeah.
So he can't even hold papers. He's always holding onto his sword or his belt. That's how he keeps his hands still. And Emma kind of goes ahead of the procession whilst Canute goes and takes the sons off, including Hartha Canute, who is very young, and tells him about a Norse witch living in Kattegat. And Emma says, oh, just so you know, Canute is dying. And obviously, Elgifu asks, well, has he named an heir? And Emma goes, no, but of course I want my sons to win as much as your sons. And they both sit on the thrones, and they both have a contemplative moment, not looking at each other, not even holding hands. But I like to think that even though we don't see the drama visibly, there's a lot of turning cogs going on in their heads, thinking, oh gosh, what do I need to do now? Who do I need to manipulate? Who do I need to get on my side? And I quite like that. Although, of course, the writers then take the horse by the reins and let it go free after that point, because after a great setup by Canute of having Edward by Emma fight Harold Harefoot to see whether intelligence can beat strength, because that's what Leif says is the greatest value of being a king. Harold Harefoot quite swiftly nearly beats Edward until Emma steps in and calls the fight off. And then he says, right, none of you will be king. You can go that way, you can go that way. Emma sends you back to Norway. Harefoot, you're taking Hartha Canute to Denmark
Emma's
to rule.
Go back to
because Spain's still in Norway. And he goes, England won't have a king, England will have a queen. And then he hands the heirship over to Emma, which causes a bit of a stir.
There's a part in there that I thought was really interesting, and it was when he well, two things. Number one, I thought it was interesting that he asked Leif, who's the one person who doesn't want to be king, what does it take to be a king?
Mm.
And so Leif says there's two things. You have to be strong, intelligent, and you have to be strong physically. And then immediately when Canute sets up this battle between his two sons, Emma says, stop this. And he says, who's going to stop it when I'm gone? And she immediately steps in, then she's the one that stops it. So there's this whole thing that's building Emma up as being the moving force here. And it goes all the way through the very last episode.
Equally, Godwin is stirring in the shadows. He is aptly in the shadows at the point of Sven Fortbeard's death, which is, spoilers, committed by Harold Harefoot, egged on by Godwin, and he does it with the pillow when Sweyn Fortbeard's in bed, because Sweyn Fortbeard hears about Godwin and Harold Harefoot wanting to get the other on the throne, and he goes, well, you know what I did when I was a lad and I wanted a throne and my father was a rubbish king? I killed him, and then I took the throne. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's not a setup for what's going to happen next, I don't know what is. But I think did that actually happen, though? Did Sweyn actually kill his father to then take the throne?
Yes.
Yes, although it's possible it wasn't his father. It's possible he was his nephew. I think there's a later. Is it Adam of Bremen? I think there's a later chronicler who describes him as his nephew. So we don't really know. It's quite possible it could be either. But yeah, he drives his father out into exile, doesn't he?
They went to war. There was a battle.
Yeah.
And Sven was killed in the battle, but he was battling his son's troops, or Canute's troops. So that's how he died. And Canute stepped in after that.
No, Sweyn Fortbeard. No, he fell off his horse in Gainsborough.
I'm sorry. It was Sven's
dad,
his father, Gorm.
There's so many kings.
Yeah, it was. I'm sorry, I got my kings mixed up.
Blame Netflix. Its muddled timeline makes us confused about what we see is true, and that's why I'm hoping, dear viewers and listeners, that you're learning as much as I am from these three wonderful guests of mine.
Yeah, I did Sweyn Fortbeard in Ian Dale's Kings and Queens of England. Either he died falling off his horse, or he was killed by the ghost of Saint Edward.
Right.
Edward the Martyr.
There's a few, aren't there?
Yeah. And we got it wrong. It's not Gorm, it's Harold.
Harold Bluetooth. Of course, yeah, Bluetooth. Whose father is Gorm.
I'm trying to get all these things organized.
So yeah, it was the guy who invented the wireless connection between mobile phones.
Yep. The runic symbol.
Sweyn's dad.
Yeah.
Well, talking about kings and death, they did something, of course, very controversial with Elgifu and Sweyn in Norway, because they didn't both die in Norway, dear readers and listeners. From reading wonderful works like Patricia's and some other non-fiction, I believe they got basically shooed out of Norway. None of them liked them. None of the Jarls liked them.
Yeah, they got chased out, and Sweyn got chased out of Norway because Elgifu was acting as regent and nobody liked the way she was acting as regent. So they both got kicked out of Norway. But Sweyn died the same year his dad did, in 1035.
Really? Oh, yeah.
So he wasn't a candidate for the throne anyway.
And supposedly they went to Denmark. They went to Harthacnut's court, and Sven died in Denmark. We don't know how. I mean, they could have been in Denmark and nowhere near Sven.
Yeah.
But that led to I don't even want to go there. The whole, who's going to be king after Canute?
Yeah,
issue.
Exactly.
When England was divided between the three sons, essentially.
Yeah, you do have to wonder. Harthacnut suddenly sees his older half brother arriving in Denmark. Harthacnut's still only a teenager, isn't he? He's not. He's there as learning to be a ruler when Canute dies in 1035. So to have his older half brother turn up in Denmark, who has also got a claim to the Danish throne, you can understand why Sweyn didn't live long after that.
Well, but there's also the thing going on that Sven was running from the Norse, the Norse people who were driving him out, and the Norse at the same time were attacking Denmark, and that's why so basically he had this army following him, and that's what kept Harthacnut from going back to England to take the throne there. He had to fight off the Norse because they were trying to take over, because there was this power vacuum. Canute was gone. Sven and his mom had not really done anything that anybody liked. The nobles were going up against them, and so they were trying to see, what can we get now? Who's strong enough to hold us off?
Well, that was the thing, and that's Magnus turned up as well.
Yes,
Magnus
Olafsson. Because they do use him as the main murderer, effectively, of Spain and Elgifu, and I didn't like the way they murdered Spain. I mean, I saluted the guy for the acting of it, but I don't like the way they basically all impaled him on 12 dozen spears, and then lowered him, and then beat him to bits. I'm like, guys, he's already dead. You don't need to keep beating him. But no, I
wonder if they were trying to do that with the to follow the Roman idea that everybody had a hand in his death, so nobody could be blamed for it. You know, if
nobody could be innocent for it.
You were all in it together, so you couldn't turn on each other because each of you had done it. And that's how the Romans did it, isn't it? With
that's very interesting.
And
it's interesting that they make Canute appear ill, because from the state of his empire and the location of his sons, it seems that his death was quite sudden and not expected. Because he's still quite young, isn't he? I mean, I think he's in his early 40s. And
I think so. He was only 1035.
He would have been.
I can't do maths, so don't ask me.
Towards 50, I think.
Approaching 50. But he died at Shaftesbury, and Shaftesbury is a convent where they had, the nuns. They had an infirmary there. So I think probably he came down with something at the very last minute and went to Shaftesbury, perhaps to pray to be cured, and turn himself over to the sisters. So I don't think it was a long-term thing. And they seem to think that all of his sons had some sort of genetic issue because they all died young.
They all died young.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It was he wasn't yet 40. I think it was 1097 he was born, wasn't it? Something like that. So he was about 18 when his dad died.
1090. Well, in my books, it's 1090. So I can't do the math. I'm an English major.
So, but I mean, all the others, Harthacnut was about
in his 20s.
Yeah, definitely a young adult.
Was about in his 30s.
Yeah.
So it was very, and no, I mean, it's all about choking or sudden illnesses, isn't it?
And it's interesting because Sven, I think, was pretty old. He was pretty long in the tooth when he died, Sven Forkbeard. But we don't know how he died. You were talking, was he, it sounded like it might have been a heart attack, something like that. But, well, Harthacnut died at a party, at a wedding. He fell, and then he didn't get consciousness. He was, for 2 days, he lingered where he died.
Like a stroke almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, of course, with Magnus killing off Elgifu and Svein, and Harthacnut and Harold Harefoot already be sent to Denmark by that point, interesting enough. Because I don't think Harold Harefoot ever went to Denmark. I always thought he was more or less based in England the whole time, just waiting for his chance. Because I remember kind of like once Canute dies, it does then go to Harold Harefoot because Harthacnut isn't there to claim it, and of course Edward is still in Normandy.
England actually, when he dies, England is split between Harefoot and Harthacnut. That was the arrangement, and Emma looks after Harthacnut's interests and takes hold of the treasury at Winchester and sends a message to Harthacnut to come and claim his share of the throne. But Harthacnut's so busy in Denmark that he doesn't come. And it takes a couple of years before Harefoot actually takes the whole of England. And it's because Harthacnut isn't there to fight his corner, and Emma doesn't have enough influence on her own. Because he needs Harthacnut to take his half of the throne, and it's basically he's supposed to have the south, and Harefoot's supposed to have the north, which I think is technically the north of the Thames rather than a rather larger portion of England than Harthacnut was supposed to get. But because he doesn't come over, Harefoot takes the whole lot.
Yeah, but Harthacnut got the best part of England. I mean, the wealthiest part of England was the south.
Yeah.
And the north was less. And of course, that's where Elfifu's family was.
Well, that's it. That's where Harefoot's influence is. Harefoot's influence is the north and Mercia and the Midlands. So he's got all that support, and that's the support he uses to take over the south when Harthacnut doesn't come to fight his own corner.
Yeah.
And there's one story that I saw somewhere, I read that the north and the south of England were both being held for Harthacnut, that Harefoot was actually a regent for Canute, and Emma was, for Harthacnut, and Emma was the regent for him in the south. So
interesting.
That was, they were waiting for him to come.
Yeah.
So.
Well, as we know, the writers completely bypassed that with sending both of them to Denmark.
Right.
Well, it's too complicated. Just send them to Denmark.
Well, interestingly, linking back to that, there's that scene at the end of the big feast where Canute declares that Emma is going to rule England instead, and Harold Harefoot is having a very toddler-esque, and I recognise it because I have one, tantrum in the Great Hall, and Godwin comes and he goes, "Where were you, Godwin? I needed my advice." And Godwin said, "I wasn't invited," which is probably Elgifu of Northampton's doing, because she doesn't like him either. And because of the way they betrayed each other in season 2, if not season 1, going that far back. And Godwin says, "Well, just think of the positives. Always find the bright side in things. Kind of like when Canute's dead, so what do you do?" And Harold Harefoot goes, "When my father's dead, his wishes don't matter anymore. So I don't have to look after the brat. I can lop him off." And I found it really comedic that Godwin was playing his part of Godwin whilst holding the puppet of Godwin, and the likeness was spot on. I really like how they got the puppets to be like each other, because they did a really nice puppet show, like a medieval-esque puppet show, and I really quite like that. But of course, when Canute dies, and that scene, I thought they did the Canute's death scene rather well. It was very emotive, very powerful, not full of tears and love, but just simple, sweet things that they say to each other. And he does say, "Emma, you need to go to Winchester to be near the treasury."
Yeah.
And of course, the one thing I always remember about learning from talking about you guys, this is kind of like that Emma is still with the treasury even when her next son from Normandy, Edward, takes the throne, and he has to basically prise the treasury off her because she's still guarding it. She's trying to cling to the power.
You control England, so you control the money first.
Yeah.
But I did think it was interesting at the end where Harefoot arrives in England and she sent for Edward, not Harthacnut. They've had her send for Edward, and it's like she didn't send for Edward at that point. She sent for Harthacnut. As far as she was concerned, Edward was Harthacnut's heir, not the other way around.
That's Godwin all over, especially in this particular depiction of Godwin. Because I do believe go on.
The theory is later on 1037, I think it was, either Godwin or Emma or somebody sent Alfred and Edward a letter telling them to come to England. Now, Emma usually gets the blame for it. I can't see it personally because it just wasn't the right time. There wasn't enough support in England for either of her sons. But Alfred gets captured whilst in the company of Earl Godwin and handed over to Harefoot, or taken by Harefoot from Earl Godwin. and blinded and dies of his wounds.
Yeah.
I think that's where the Godwin telling Emma to send for Edward comes from. It's just it didn't happen in 1035. It was a few years later.
Yeah. I like to think with that scene, Godwin was trying to work out if Emma had done this thing or not, if she was going to stay true to Canute and try and do it solo. Because, of course, he's trying to kind of like cause her anxiety and doubt by saying, oh, but the Witan won't support you. I think there'll be civil war and you need to stop all this before it gets worse. And she goes, I already have done. I've sent for my son, Godwin, because I'm that bit clever. But then, of course, Godwin goes, aha, I must get Harold Harefoot immediately to the speedy mail, speedy messengers and speedy boats, and somehow Harefoot beats all of them. And, of course, that's what usurps Emma. But then Emma at the end, and this is the one bit I did not like, decides to use her wily, womany, beautiful, I'm still kind of in my prime, Harold Harefoot, darling, I know you're my stepson, but would you like to hold my hand whilst I sit really close to you on this throne? And I'm like, no.
So I read that a little differently. I mean, you can read it that way, but I read it differently as that he recognized where the power was. And she was pulling a power play on him, and she was pulling it on Godwin too, and letting him know, I'm the queen and I'm going to handle this. Look out, Godwin, get out of my way. So yes, there was this kind of sexual backdrop to it. But I really felt like it was more a power play than a sexual thing. So,
I mean, it is quite aptly both. She was trying to regain power from Godwin pulling that hoodwink of her getting Harold Harefoot there by thinking, okay, well, I've dated one king, maybe I can date the next king kind of thing. But it's because when Harold Harefoot meets her in Kattegat, he goes, oh, you're just as beautiful as I remember. I thought, oh, he's putting on the charm on her. That's, plus he was kind of like naked and what's the word, fornicating when we first see him. So I think he's just after anything, recently. And if it happens to be the Queen of England, so be it. As he says, like, Godwin, go do the planning. Me and the Queen need to talk. And I'm like,
that's the rabbit connection to his name.
Yeah.
Quite right.
That's why it's called Harefoot, is it?
Yes.
Not because he was ran fast, because
the thing is, there's so much intrigue that went on at that time that they don't use. They made up their own intrigues for this story. I mean, I really think that letter that brought Edward and Alfred to England, I think that was sent by Harefoot and Elfgifu. And they were waiting for them when they came to England. They were immediately captured. So even if you look at the letter, it says something like, follow the instructions given by this person who gives you this paper. And it's like, wait, what? So I think it was a real setup by Harefoot.
Well, maybe they were nodding towards that with Godwin getting Harefoot in so quickly. Of course, we mustn't forget Hardrada in all this. Of course, we've come more or less summarised how him and Machinacus start hating each other. And, of course, they do portray Harold having an affair with Empress Zoe. And the reasoning for this is unusual in that it emerges through a complicated series of secret meetings and liaisons, and then a masked event where Hardrada is presumably following what he thinks is Zoe and finds the Emperor indulging in some ladies. And the Emperor goes, oh, yes, you're wondering why I've sent Zoe to find you. It's because I cannot have a son, and we thought you'd make a better father than me in producing one, kind of thing. I thought, okay, right, yeah, sure, we'll roll with that.
One big problem with this, by this point, Empress Zoe was actually in the 40s,
she's very old.
I think 50s. She's well past childbearing age.
She's well past it. She couldn't have kids, full stop. She only became empress when she was about 50, I think it was. So every man who married her did it for the power, not to have children with her.
Yeah, but she has a habit of taking younger lovers.
Yeah.
And I think in Heimskringla saga, it talks about a lady of the court sets Harold free when he's been imprisoned.
Yeah.
And kind of looking through the sources, it's very probable that he leads the Varangian escort of, I think, Empress Zoe's sister probably goes to Jerusalem, and he's taking the stonemasons who'll build the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So Harold, I think, is possibly Zoe's lover, but he's he definitely has a connection with the royal court, and it wouldn't be unlike Empress Zoe to take a younger, kind of a butch young Varangian as a lover.
Well, they have their nice times, is what we shall say. They have their nice times. Unfortunately, that scene following the masked ball, the Emperor divulging the real reason why he's perfectly happy for Zoe to dilly-dally with Harold, turns out that it's not Zoe and it was just a redhead in disguise, and she then promptly slices the Emperor's neck. That's the blood. Harold's there saying, help, help, someone catch that woman. She's already escaped. And then, of course, Maniace strides in, saying, arrest that man. He's murdered the Emperor. And thus Maniace claims more power and has a royal, not quite a royal, a Christian trial of Harold for kind of like murder and adultery.
I seem to remember.
I'm not sure if Harold faced any trial, did he? Or was he just straight put into prison?
He was accused.
That Emperor, I think, was drowned in his bath. I seem to remember.
Oh, right.
Michael IV. I'm pretty sure he was drowned in his bath rather than having his throat slit. Michael V was the one who was blinded at a monastery.
Yeah, I don't know if he drowned in his bath. He's certainly very ill. I think he has dropsy, because after Sicily, he and Harold are on a campaign. I think against the Bulgars, and in the victory sort of triumph parade, he is so bloated that he can barely sit on his horse, and he dies not long after. And then I think Harold is accused by the next emperor, he's the nephew. He's a good-looking nephew of the chief eunuch, who's brought into the palace as a kind of a lure for Zoe, and he accuses Harold or Maniace accuses Harold of not giving his due share of booty to the Byzantine court. So he's basically accused of kind of embezzling stolen, war booty, war plunder, and he's imprisoned. Imprisoned is a kind of is a very modern term. He's locked in a cellar of a house. I'm trying to think of the name of in the saga. I think is it the kind of the barracks of a cavalry unit, something like that. And at the same time, the Varangians being the palace guard, they're replaced by a palace guard of Pechenegs. So there's a real kind of, essentially there's a power struggle, and the Varangians get kicked out of the palace. They're very, very despondent, and when the emperor puts Zoe in a monastery and tries to claim power himself, then one of the palace ladies comes and releases Harold, and he joins up with the Varangians, who are very despondent and unhappy about being kicked out of the palace, and he leads the kind of the counterattack. And this is, as far as we know from the saga, is all true, which is the most extraordinary.
Netflix missed a lot there. We just get him being in Constantinople for 7 years under the same emperor, not having any of these other kind of things. We don't even see him go to Jerusalem. We see him in Syracuse, and then he's in Constantinople for the rest of it. He does have his uncle from Rus, or the Rus, kind of visit him, saying, Harold, why are you still here? I've got your gold back at home, and it's enough to buy 5 armies. And it all feeds into, of course, Harold's ambition, which I do kind of think was a nice touch towards him as a historical figure, because he's done so much in that life all to eventually get the throne of Norway. But when Maniace puts him on trial, Maniace manipulates him emotionally by having his favourite 3 Varangians turn up. One's asked, did this man have sex with Empress Zoe? And he goes, no. And Maniace goes, are you sure? And then he presents his beaten up girlfriend. And so Harold Hadrad's like, oh crumbs, my friend's either going to betray me or he's going to hate me for the rest of my life because his girlfriend gets killed effectively after this point. So Harold Hadrada nobly says, oh yes, I did it, I raped her though, so she is completely innocent, and she should be annulled of all sin, and then of course gets taken off, and he doesn't go to a house, it's some kind of fortress island. He goes on a boat, and he thinks he saved his friends, but then Maniakes has left him an unfortunate welcoming party of his 3 friends, all on a pole, all badly beaten up and being pecked at by crows. And he's then thrown into this deep, almost like hole cavern under the fortress, lowered down on a net. And he finds a raven friend and some bone, and decides to chisel the bone to make a bone pick and chisel his one remaining torch to make splinters. And then he uses the wine and the bread he gets to get the ravens drunk, I believe, drunk enough that they lay flat, tie some tethered rope round them with the shavings he's got, and then he sets them alight and he goes, when all is lost, what do? We go home, and then the ravens fly free with their flaming tethers and set fire to Constantinople, remarkably. At the same time, he's coming out to face his death penalty. And then he picks a fight with Maniakes, and Maniakes gets it, quite justifiably, I think. Because he's not a nice man from the word go, really.
And then he just leaves.
He just leaves.
It's like, actually, when he was, like Justin said, he was freed from his prison. He fought to put Empress Zoe back on the throne. And then he does ask to leave. And the Empress refuses. Yeah. So he has to escape. And I think they missed the best bit, because they didn't. He escapes with 2 ships out of Constantinople harbour. And he actually jumps, one ship gets caught, but he jumps over the chain in the harbour, jumps the ship over the chain. And I thought, I was waiting for that bit. Yeah. I always thought that's my favourite bit, and they don't even do it.
Yeah, because if you go to Constantinople now, there's pieces of that chain in the museum, the Topkapi Palace Museum. The saga has that they row very hard towards the chain, and he tells them all to run to the back of the boat, and the front rears up, and they sort of stop on the chain, and they all run to the front of the boat and then slip over. And the second boat, its spine or its keel breaks on the chain, and it sinks with a fair portion of his treasure. And of course, the emperor who's now running Constantinople now, the nobles have taken control of Zoe. And she kind of has been emasculated, really. She's not given, they decide which of them will marry her, and she doesn't get the choice anymore. And clearly, because of course Harold probably blinds the emperor who, the previous emperor, so the emperor who put him in prison and put Zoe in a convent, is blinded, and that's probably Harold who does it, or certainly kind of one under his command. And so I always think kind of the next emperor, you have this, big, burly foreigner, who effectively, kind of blinded your predecessor. And again, he's too powerful and too dangerous to have hanging around. And so Harold, in a sense, I think he knows his time is up there and he needs to escape. And so, he flees back to Kiev, doesn't he?
But can I ask, is the kind of because I believe I've read in one of the books, possibly this one, Harold Hardrada, The Warrior's Way, because is it an urban myth or not about him or some other Viking using birds and tethers of fire to set fire to some settlement that they're trying to get into?
I think it's in a story in the Sicily campaign, but it's a story that is repeated. I mean, 50. Yeah. I mean, there's another Viking story where they have the same, the same kind of ruse, and it's a ruse that gets repeated, and essentially one of those kind of medieval tropes that they like to kind of trot out.
Okay.
It may have happened, probably not, but
Yeah. I mean, I'll salute the cast for doing it, because they looked like very real ravens to me. They didn't use kind of like animatronics or CGI. They were remarkably good ravens at lying still. I don't know how they taught a group of 6 ravens all to play dead effectively.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you were talking about the prison, because the saga has Harold in prison with 2 of his men, and one of them is the Icelander, I think, Haldor. anyway, that the Icelander is probably the oral source for most of this Heimskringla saga about Harold, because he goes, after Harold returns to Norway, he goes back to Iceland. And kind of these tales of birds setting fire to buildings, that's the kind of thing you would entertain other people with during the long Icelandic winters. And so the guy who's in prison with Harold is probably the source of the oral tradition that 200 years later Snorri Sturluson writes down. Is it Snorri? I'm not sure if it's Snorri actually. Anyway, yeah. So that's very interesting. So there's a kind of Icelandic slant to the sagas about Harold.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you can pick up a bit of tension between the two characters, where Haldor's kind of holding a grudge a bit against Harold.
I really should get that book and read it. I keep hearing about it, but never actually read the actual original source text, which is interesting. But of course, in that pivotal scene where he sets the ravens free, that's when he's just before he taken up for his supposed execution. He then carves in runes, and I'm not a runic expert, so I can't confirm or not whether those runes are accurate, but he does write in the name Hardrada into the wall. Then, of course, it's like sand washed with magic into English, so we know what we're looking at. And that's the first time we see it in the series. And of course, this is near the end now, because then it radically skips forward to finding him in Norway. We don't see the entire trip, just like we didn't see him take the trip from Rus down to Constantinople. They just do a time switcheroo and get him back into Norway, just as Magnus is roaming around, having offed Spain and Ilgifu, claiming power. And interestingly enough, they show it being quite a short-lived conflict between Magnus and Harold, in that the Jarls can't make up their mind. It's a 50-50 split. So, okay, Jarls, the Jarls say, can you not just rule together for us? Because we want to have faith with the Pope, which Magnus apparently brings, because Harold's fling with Freydis earlier is what angered the Pope, and so he's going to be excommunicated if he doesn't burn Freydis, because if Freydis turns up and gets captured, she's a whole other story, guys. A whole other story.
The story between Magnus and Harold actually seems to be more financial. Harold had come back from Constantinople rather rich, and Magnus was a king but without any money, so he agreed to share the throne with Harold, as I think Harold as sub-king rather than whole king. Under Magnus, so long as Harold shared his fortune with Magnus.
Really? I never knew. I don't know why, but I thought they had a few wars or battles between them over who was going to eventually be, and then neither of them once, then they both agree to, okay, we'll wait for each other's turn.
Magnus did die the following year. It was a very short agreement, and nobody seems to know exactly how Magnus died, but I'm suspecting it wasn't of natural causes.
Yeah, and it's interesting about Harold and the church as well, because as far as we know, he has almost no contact with the Western church, but clearly a very deep contact with the Eastern Orthodox Church. My guess is probably that he brings back, because he founds quite a few churches and cathedrals when he goes back to Norway. And my hunch is that he's bringing Orthodox priests or monks back with him. And he builds a cathedral in Oslo, and it's of wood, and it has a kind of double nave. It's the most extraordinary kind of church, and I do kind of think this guy has seen Hagia Sophia, which is the most sort of sublime and I think it's the largest church in Christendom until St. Paul's is built, and he must have been so impressed by that, and kind of wants to build something equally impressive when he gets back to Norway. Obviously he doesn't have stonemasons, but he does have woods craftsmen, and so he builds this extraordinary church, excuse me, with a double nave, and so kind of Christianizing Norway, and Christianizing in a sense of kind of impressing the locals with learning and big buildings, as opposed to necessarily book learning. seems part of his kind of kingly strategy.
Interesting.
I have a question. One of the characters that we meet in this Valhalla is Harold Hardrada's son by Freydis. Did Harold have a son?
He had 2, I think.
Yeah.
And
none. He had 2 sons by, what was her name? Spire Arneson or something.
Yeah,
he supposedly had 2 wives at the same time. Elisif of Kiev.
Yeah,
as one does.
Thora, who was a Dane. And Elisif only had daughters, and Thora only had sons. One of them was called Magnus, and he was the one who became King of Norway after Harold died. And he'd invaded Wales when he was about 13.
As you do.
Yeah.
And didn't Harold...
I can't remember the name of the other son.
I think Swain, but I could be wrong. He's at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, I think. And he survives, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he left Magnus in Norway to rule whilst he came over to Stamford Bridge, to England. And the other one was at Stamford Bridge.
Well, alas, they don't show him marrying anyone, not even Freydis. And he's very grumpy when Freydis reunites.
He survived Stamford Bridge, and he was the one who was allowed to take the Norwegian and Danish warriors home. He was allowed to leave in his ships, even though they'd been defeated.
So wasn't there a Magnus who had a deal with Harthacnut that if either of them died, they would take over? Magnus, if Harthacnut died, Magnus would take over Denmark and England.
Yes, Magnus the Good or Magnus Olafsson.
So that was Harold Hardrada's nephew.
Yeah, they shared the throne for a year.
That was Harold Hardrada's claim to England, that he was Magnus's heir, and Magnus had this deal with Harthacnut that whichever one lived longest, the other would take over. Whichever one died first, the other would be his heir. So Hardrada's argument was that he was entitled to England because he was Harthacnut's heir as the heir of Magnus.
Which always seems
a stretch.
Always seems to be the most fatuous argument. Kind of made it's kind of a legalese argument that made no sense.
Yeah.
But the only kind of sense I can make of it is in a sense Harold Hardrada is his early life is dominated by Canute the Great, who kind of kills his brother, drives him into exile, and he's spends all his time in the Mediterranean. And in the sense, the only way I can make sense of it, he's competing with Canute's ghost in that actually if Canute could conquer England, then damn it, Harold Hardrada can. Because he thinks, I think he is a much more impressive character. Or he's achieved an extraordinary amount. So that's the only way that can make sense to me, but I guess medieval chroniclers weren't into kind of personal psychology in the same way. They preferred these other kind of more obtuse arguments.
So would he have been very amenable when Tostig turns up after having his tiff with Harold Godwinson, saying, "Oh, can you come and save England for my brother, please? We'll make you king," effectively?
I think so. I think he's a bit bored. He comes back to Norway. He becomes king, and then he fights some wars against the Danes. But I think he's just I think he just turned 50. He's probably a little bit bored and just kind of one last throw of the dice. And Tostig turns up and he thinks, if Canute can do it, goddamn it, I can do it. And actually, the warriors who are with him are, he's for 1066. I always kind of say, if you were a betting man, you had your money on Harold Hardrada, because neither William or Godwin, they're both successful warriors, but neither of them are kind of professional soldiers. Harold Hardrada has been part of Europe's most professional military organization, which is the Byzantine Empire, succeeded in it, and brought back with him a kind of an elite troop of warriors who are with him, or were in the Varangian Guard, who are battle hardened in a way that no one in Western, Christianity is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. There's for the excavations at Fulford, which is the first battle of 1066. There's a scabbard which is Byzantine scabbard essentially. It's been found in the ford there, which has to be one of Harold Hardrada's Varangian kind of followers. So I think he just thinks if Canute did it, he can do it. I can do it.
Well, thinking back a few episodes, there is a nice scene where Godwin's gone to Norway to do his Norwegian thing with Harold Harefoot, and Canute and Emma pay a visit to Normandy to see her sons. And of course, there we meet the slightly older than historically accurate young Duke William de Bie of Normandy. And he himself is quite closely pushed underfoot by, I believe, his uncle, because his father was offed or murdered in some way.
His uncle on his mother's side.
Yeah. His father had died returning from Jerusalem.
Yes, and they've got Richard II there. Emma's brother is there. So
that's what I was going to ask you about. I was getting very confused.
And it's like he's not actually in charge of anything. He's like in William's mother's brother, who's an absolute nobody, rule England, rule Normandy for William. And it's like, actually, there was a great big power struggle when William was young. There was one of his advisors was killed in William's bedroom while William was in bed, while William was actually
present. They do show that.
Yeah, that's what's alluded to, isn't it?
He was kidnapped several occasions with people knowing that having hold of the Duke means you're in charge. But it was funny that Emma's brother's there, and it's like he's nobody as far as ruling is concerned. He's like, and shouldn't he be dead by now?
Yeah, it's an interesting family tree they need to detangle or untangle.
Well, what I thought was interesting that they had Canute and Emma. They're actually travelling home from Rome, and they divert to Normandy to see Edward and Alfred. And you have this dynamic between the boys and their mother, where Edward resents his mother for abandoning him, which we know he did. He did resent Emma. And Alfred's the more compliant son and glad to see his mother. Whether or not Edward resented his mother that early, I don't know.
He certainly makes it clear that kind of like he sees his father's throne being given away by someone else who isn't him, and I think that all happens in the same episode where Godwin and Harefoot are having that lovely chat with Svein Fortbeard about all being wanting to be king. And I quite liked the scene where they have Canute have that fatherly man-to-man conversation with Edward, saying, "You're not ready yet. Thrones are inherited, but being a king is made." And I thought that was a beautiful line. I thought that was really powerful. Because, of course, Svein Fortbeard made his kingship by offing his dad. And so it's always seeing these alternative approaches to gaining power and gaining the throne, and kind of like the nice route that's nice for everyone, or the kind of like the just off everyone as you go kind of thing. And, of course, at the end of that scene, that episode, there's Alfred, Edward, and Duke William de Bie, and they're all saying, "Oh, why are we? When are we going to have our moment? When do we want our time?" And it's the young Duke William that says, "I am waiting for my time. Let them forget that you were there, and then when you are old enough to technically be a man and not need shepherding around, you can just trample them all over, basically." And I thought, oh, that's a nice little streak coming through, because again, that's another kind of. That's what Godwin is effectively doing with everyone else. And he says it to like a figure in Canterbury. He goes, "I always back a winner. I know where to place my bets," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought that I just liked the way they show these manipulative political strategies dynamics, both kind of like even with these young boys who eventually make a blood oath to that we will have our moment, we will become kings and dukes and rule the world and that kind of thing. We will wait till all these adults drop dead, effectively. For one reason or another. Excuse me. I thought that was an interesting touch, but I really liked the chat that Canute had with Edward. I really liked it. And of course, Emma says to Canute earlier before then, kind of like that Edward hates me because I married you not for the kingdom, not for him, but for me. I wanted you. And I thought, oh, that's the thing with being a woman. We can't be selfish all the time. We've got to think of everybody else.
Well, and later on, she's talking to Edward as they're all saying goodbye. They're Bobbin and Caddagat, and everyone's been assigned their role. And she says to Edward, "You have to wait. I know you're going to be king, but it's not time yet." When Ethelred had several sons, and there was no guarantee who was going to be king, so you have to wait. And yeah, I think that was very astute reference to Emma. I think that's exactly what she thought, because she always said that she tried to promote all of her children. She tried to do whatever she could for their best interests, and we see that in that scene.
Well, the other thing is, I think that when you look at history, you know, Arthur Canute invites Edward when he's king. He invites Edward to come to England and be there, and there's no way that wasn't at the instigation of Emma.
Exactly.
You know, you need to settle the succession now, let everybody know who's going to succeed you, and Edward is the prime candidate. You know, he's throne worthy, he's the athling.
Because Arthur Canute was too young, or he didn't get married in time, did he? And therefore he had no heirs anyway.
Yeah, he never got married.
Right.
No.
So yeah, I think Emma must have had a hand in inviting Edward to England when he came, and in guaranteeing his safety as well.
Yes. On the whole, I think they did paint a better picture of Emma and Canute as the series went on, whereas Harold Hardrada, they just had him overly ambitious, chasing all the pretty things, all the wealth, and then, oh no, you've lost it all now, please go back to Norway and resume your throne, and that kind of thing. And he's just very kind of like gruff and butch with anyone, and then kind of Leif says, I don't recognise this Harold I see before me. He goes, no, that Harold died back in Constantinople when all my friends died and I lost to Maniakes, that kind of thing. That's almost sulking in a way. I thought you're just sulking that you lost in Constantinople and now you're being deliberately harsh on everybody else. Because he does imprison Magnus within one day of them co-ruling in this series. He goes, I'm sorry, nephew, but you don't deserve that throne, you're off to prison. And then the Jarls are like, yes, but we asked you to co-rule. He goes, well, tough. You can either join him or you follow me. And he gets a helmet with a crown on. And that's when he says his name is, I am Harold Hardrada, and I will make this the greatest nation in the world. And then they're all shouting, Hardrada, Hardrada, Hardrada. Which, again, is possibly peaking a bit too soon in his kind of kingship, I think, because he's not done much in the way of being a king yet, apart from take a throne off his nephew.
No, I think they were a bit unfair to Hardrada in the series, actually. They didn't make him out. I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of him, though, so I always like to see the best in him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as I think we've said this in nearly every, in all 3 episodes, even this one, that there was so much history both behind Leif Erikson as well as Hardrada, as well as Canute and Emma, that they could have made them an individual series just on those characters alone. They didn't need to merge them all together and have their cake and eat it. There was so much to explore. And in a way, I actually felt sad when it ended. I thought, oh, because now we've got all these characters here and there is that void, as we've all been saying, that void in England. That would have been interesting to see how they then work it all out as chess pieces being scattered the way they were. But it is what it is. Netflix have decided that was enough. So that was enough.
Well, you do wonder if they didn't get to the end of the final episode and go, actually, if they don't renew this for another season, phew, because we have got everything so mixed up and muddled up. I'm not quite sure how we can get to 1066, honestly.
Don't you think that they probably knew by the time they wrote that final episode, they knew it was not going to be continued.
Yeah.
So they had to figure out a way to tie up what the loose ends that they had. Yeah. I think that was probably what was going on. But I wanted to say, Sharon, I really thought that Harold, all through the whole show, was the manliest. I mean, so many horrible things happened to him. He was constantly fighting, and he was just and constantly winning, building up towards this Harold Hardrada when he finally sits on the throne and boom, I'm it.
Yes,
he was quite a good-looking guy.
He is, and I will say this: I was actually a few days before this recording, I watched a clip, and you can find it on the BAFTAs YouTube channel, of the actor. I can't remember his name. Sorry, Harold Hardrada. I'll just call you character's name. But he was talking about going into that role, and he was given the script, and he thought, "Oh gums, how am I going to do the accent?" Because of course he's actually English. He's not of any Scandinavian descent, like some of the cast are. Because Freydis is, and Leif, I think, is. Or did he have an Aussie accent? But he was. Then he started thinking, oh, I quite like the character of Godwin. He seems quite kind of like cool and manipulative and shadowy. But then everyone could say, no, don't pass up Hardrada. It's the chance of a lifetime. Go for Hardrada. So he went for it. And then they were doing their filming, and they were meant to film some kind of battle encampment scene, but there'd been a storm. The tents had been ruined. It was mudlogged. And this was also during the era just after COVID lift downs were just starting to pull up a bit. So they had to find a small space and a small number of cast members to do a scene. And the first scene he got to do in his role was when him and Freydis coupled together that first night in Kattegat. And I thought, wow, what a way to start your journey as Harold Hardrada is bedding a beautiful woman. But yes, but I think he did it really well. And considering it's his big first role, I thought he did wonderfully. I mean, just like you could go through clips of him just constantly saying, "I'm Harold Sigurdsson, I'm Harold Sigurdsson, I'm Harold Sigurdsson." He just says it with such relish, and you kind of like get the sense of the character just through those words. Whereas Leif, I was like, you're just a man who has no real goal in life. You're having a midlife crisis that's lasting 3 seasons. You need to find a reason to go west and go west. Freydis, we haven't really talked much about her, partly because I don't know much about her story or Greenland, apart from the Vikings were in Greenland and her father was Eric the Red. Eric the Red turns out to be a bit of a dominating guy. He doesn't want anyone to leave Greenland. He wants everyone to come to Greenland, even though it's a shit place to live.
Well, he was exiled to Greenland, wasn't he? He didn't go there by choice.
He was exiled.
Yeah, exiled. Iceland.
He had to leave, and he couldn't go back.
No.
Yeah, he alludes that because he says, "Oh, welcome, people of Jonsberg. I know what it's like to lose your home and your things, but welcome to my home." But of course, Freydis wants to keep going to find the land in the west because that's what she was told by the seeress, and Stigger's convinced her that that's where they're meant to be. But Eric's like, "No, there is no place in the west. You must keep your boats and your supplies here and your people here. We need people for the settlement and everything else." So she gets in quite a family dilemma of wills against her father, and he eventually kidnaps her son and sends him to live with some Inuit type folk further up north. So yeah, but that was never resolved either by the end of the season.
She's a very interesting character. I think there's 2 sagas that she appears in, and one she's kind of the baddie, and one she's the goodie. So it's really interesting. There's I can't remember what they're called now, but there's 2 kind of versions of her, and I think she's the one who, when they're in Vinland, or what is now kind of North America, the story goes that one of the locals tries to take some beads or something, and a fight breaks out, and the Vikings are on the run, but she bares her breasts and slaps her breasts with a sword, and that terrifies the locals, and they run off. So she seems like kind of the person you want to sit down and have a kind of drink with, because of course in the saga where she's a baddie, I think she kills kind of 4 Vikings with an axe. Yeah. So
yeah, we don't get any of that, unfortunately. We get a strong woman protagonist, get woman leading a whole flock of people, but then she comes against her father, and there's just the whole issue of conflict, and she flees Greenland to go to Kattegat to find a new boat because Eric's got their boat, and a new captain because Eric killed their captain. So she's got no physical means of getting to beyond Greenland. So she goes to Kattegat, and that's where she gets captured. Magnus Olafsson's there. He's a real piece of work. He's probably I think he's more evil than Maniakis, to be honest, because he's the one that offs Gifu, off Spain, and he's on this big vendetta to make his dad, of course, Harold's brother, Olaf, a saint. And he claims he's going to go to Jomsburg and find the sanctified remains of his father. He doesn't. Freydis actually traps him there, and remarkably he gets his way off, because he has to, because they can't leave him in Jomsburg. That's not what happened in history in Jomsburg. I don't know if it existed or not.
Olaf was killed.
I was going to say Olaf was killed when Harold left. So they get that. They get the whole Olaf becoming a saint bit really very mixed up, or very unoriginal, I should say. Unoriginal.
Well, there's a story that when Saint Olaf's body was dug up, Elfgifu was there, and she took a look at it, and supposedly it was not rotted. And she said something like, he's no saint. And that you have that image, you have that idea there in the story where, he comes and he says, I have my father's body and he's going to be a saint. She says, that would be a miracle. So you get that little thing going on. And of course, she in the show, in the previous episode, the previous season, she and Olaf were lovers.
Yes.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to say about Freydis was they really made her a warrior. And that's picking up on how we see her in Vinland as being a warrior woman. She's kind of a Lagertha character, a real warrior woman. And they really picked that up, that she's quite something when it comes to holding a sword.
Yeah.
Yes. Of course, Magnus doesn't find his dad's body because he gets a bit stuck in Jomsburg. So he decides to off one of his men and then absolutely butcher the face and the head. So you couldn't really tell if it was Olaf or not. He just happens to have his cross, which was a remarkable find. I don't know why they kept the cross, but they did, apparently, in Jomsburg, and that's what they left behind. So of course he's there going on about this, and as you say, Elgifu says, well, he was no saint anyway, kind of thing. So I think I've covered all the things that I liked or didn't like. Has anyone else got any last pointers?
I just want to say, I think Jomsburg did exist. And we know that Knut was sent his son Sven there at some point, and possibly Elfgifu with him at some point in that period in the 1030s, early 1030s or late 1020s. That he had stuff going on in the Baltic, and that's where Jomsburg is, at the top of Germany, Poland area. So it existed.
I did wonder if it was them alluding to the Joms Vikings, which I believe were natural people.
That's where they was in Jomsburg.
My brain was putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4. That's good.
I did like the way they referred to Canute as Canute the Great, because there are not many people in Britain who actually know that he has the epithet the Great, and that there are 2 kings of England known as the Great, Alfred and Canute. Yeah,
because Emma also calls him like Emperor of the North, doesn't she? And actually in my book, well, not mine, I didn't write it, I'd asked, but the one I've read about Canute is called Canute, Emperor of the North. So yes, there are good books out there, dear viewers and listeners and watchers, that if you want to find out the truth behind these remarkable cast of characters, I implore you to go read them, as well as the wonderful fiction written by our friends Patricia and Justin, because Justin has written Shield Wall about Godwin, And he's also written Viking Fire, which I do have. It's just living up with the big spiders, so it's doing a job of protecting me from the big spiders at the minute.
Yeah, it's early
Of Viking
Godwin.
Fire.
The end of Ethelred and Reddy's reign. And if so, Beck, if you know, if you might need something to kind of scratch your itch for Vikings after this, and if you haven't, you know, gone through the sagas, and any of your viewers or listeners, I heartily recommend it. You know, they're surprisingly readable. Usually, you get past the first couple of chapters, which is long lists of things, and they're surprisingly like a modern novel, and you know, kind of great characters, tons of female characters in a way that we just don't see them until, I don't know, until kind of, you know, the 17th century. You know, rounded, interesting, fascinating characters and all kinds of stories from the Viking world.
So what title would you recommend then for us to go to? Is it the Heimskringla or
That's
the Book of Kings, whatever it's called?
I wouldn't go with that. I'd go with Njarl's saga, or the saga of Burnt Njarl, which is my favourite of the sagas. Then if Patricia or Sharon have one you recommend.
Thank you very much. I will indeed add that to my book list.
Any specific names, unfortunately, but I just Googled Snorri Sturluson, and I got a few of them. They're actually available online. It's like, and they're great to go through. They're brilliant to read.
Yeah, and there's Laxdæla saga, which is that's a shorter one, which is maybe a nice place to start. And that's the people of the Valley of the Lax, I think. Yeah. If you go to Iceland, a lot of these places, I mean, you can visit them because they're all, I mean, they haven't moved.
Yeah.
They're still there.
I mean, I know, Patricia, you've been recently in the UK visiting and touring some sites that Emma and Canute have been to. You went to Winchester, which of course is real, and the cathedral has a lot of connections to Emma and Canute, does it not?
It does. It does. I found out something recently that when I was in Shaftesbury, and when I got home, which is where Canute died, when I got home, I discovered that there's a glass bowl, and it's the only glass bowl intact from that period. And it was in Shaftesbury. They discovered it, and they think that Canute's heart was in there.
Wow.
And the people from Winchester said, thanks, we'll have that. And they put it, they took it to Winchester, but I didn't see it in Winchester when I was there. They had a thing on the Anglo-Saxons, and I didn't see that. So I don't know where it is, but I'm sure it's somewhere in the cathedral.
That was the one last thing about the series. They gave Canute a Viking funeral.
Oh gosh, yes, we forgot that bit.
He got two funerals.
Instead of burying him in Winchester,
a dummy funeral,
and then put him on a boat and set him on fire.
Yes, with treasure. There was actual treasure on that ship, and I'm like, she would not have sent that to the bottom of the sea. She would have kept it, surely. But yes,
yeah, that was a bit.
I wasn't sure if we were seeing a vision of Emma's mind, or if she really had kind of like put someone else in the coffin and just told no one to open up the coffin. Basically, don't look at the coffin. Your father is dead. He's happy as he is. Don't look at him. Don't look at him, children. Kind of thing. But yes, that was an interesting one because, of course, the burning arrow just makes me think of Robin Hood, because that's the legend of him firing an arrow off and saying, "Bury me there." But yes, that was an interesting one. But he didn't burn in a ship. He was generally buried in a Christian burial. His bones, along with Emma's and Harthacnut's, were in caskets in Winchester Cathedral, all happily resting in their rightful place until the Civil War in England. And I think it was the parliamentarians that raided the cathedral and started throwing all the bones about, and then people collected them up and got them all mixed up. But they've only just now started being put together in that way, because I believe you saw a woman's bones laid out in Winchester Cathedral, did you not, Patricia?
Yes, I did. And they still are not willing until they get actual DNA confirmation to say that it's Emma's bones. And of course, Sharon, I'm sure, will agree with me that they're Emma's bones, because there's only one woman buried among those royals and bishops, you know. And I'm hoping that they can figure out, because they have Harthacnut's, Emma's, and Canute's, that they can do some DNA research and connect the dots, essentially, and verify that those are Emma's bones. So
I believe you kind of like very kindly showed photos of it in your newsletters, which people do subscribe to. She's always showing wonderful tales and adventures. It's interesting to see how some of them it's not a complete skeleton by any means. I think even her lower jaw is missing. So it's
yes, well, they probably picked up the skull and threw it. No, but there is a real mystery because there's a hole in the top of her head, in the top of the skull, and I have yet to be able to find anyone who can explain that to me. I've written to the woman who was in charge of it. She's at University Dublin now, and she hasn't gotten back to me, and I'm still trying to figure. I'm going to be talking to a pathologist about it, showing him the picture and saying, what is that? So we'll find out, or maybe we won't find out. Who knows? It may just be a forever mystery.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the funding and the people willing to do the research and whether there's the demand for such knowledge, because of course this all takes money and time and resources and that kind of thing. But I, for one, if it was on Kickstarter, I'd throw money at it. Just saying, let's get a Kickstarter going to identify the bones. Kickstarter for DNA testing of the royal family. Gosh, time has flown. Time has really flown, and I've really enjoyed talking to all three of you about this series, the good, the bad, the in-between, the ugly, the nice, the powerful, the evocative, and of course learning about the genuine history behind all that inspired this interpretation. Very strong word, interpretation of history, ladies and gentlemen. Do not go to that series and believe you're learning everything you need to know to do GCSE history, because you're not. By any means not. Do not quote from it. You'll confuse your teacher immensely. But yes, there are wonderful books. I will have links to these wonderful people down in the description below. And of course, if you haven't seen season 3 yet and have watched it till now, well, spoilers, we did warn you. But either way, I hope you then come back to this after watching it and find it more illuminating. But hopefully maybe another Viking thing will come up soon and we will get together and talk. And I'm sure for one, I'm of course much awaiting Patricia's upcoming 4th book. She is beavering away at it. I know for a fact that was why she was doing all her lovely research visits when she was over in England. And of course, Sharon's got another new book out this year on women in royal history. Is it the ones in Scotland? Is it the
Scotland's Medieval Queens? It's out in January.
Out in January, there you go, people.
Lady Macbeth gets mentioned. Lady Macbeth opens it, so which is why I knew about Macbeth's visit to Rome.
See, that's something I've already learned in later life, that the Macbeth character from Shakespeare was a real figure. I had no idea until my much later life.
And totally not the character in Shakespeare. He had 17 years of peaceful rule was actually Macbeth.
See, they don't tell you that when you study it in English GCSE. They don't tell you that at all. They just make you read all the lines and study the ins and outs of the words, but not the character's backgrounds.
Lady Macbeth, she doesn't even get her name in the book in Shakespeare. It doesn't. She's just called Lady Macbeth. Her name's Gruoch, but she doesn't even get named. So yeah.
Well, I would like to, of course, offer a great big thank you to Patricia Bracewell, to Sharon Bennett Connolly, and the always majestic Justin Hill for joining me in this wonderful escapade of fiction versus fact, so to speak. And I thank you all for your time again, and we hope you, dear viewers, have enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for watching and listening wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you all.